Good morning, dear children. Let's do a poem from Lesson 5, A Legend of the Northland. A Legend of the Northland is a traditional, popular story composed in the style of a ballet. It narrates the legend of how Saint Peter had once cursed an old lady for being mean and stingy. The poem thus imparts the important lesson that greed always gets punishment. Before we get into the explanation of the poem, let me give you a brief introduction about the poetess. Phoebe Cary was an American poet and the younger sister of poet Alice Cary. The sisters co-published poems in 1849 and then each of them went on to publish volumes of their own. After their deaths in 1871, joint anthologies of the sisters' unpublished poems were also compiled. Phoebe Cary was born on 4th of September 1824 in Mount Healthy, Ohio, United States. She died on 31st July 1871 in Newport, Rhode Island, United States due to hepatitis. Her nationality was American. Her sibling, Alice Cary. Let's understand the significance of the title A Legend of the Northland. The title of the poem clearly states that the poem is about a legend from the cold region of Northland. Like every legend, it's a story passed on from generation to generation and believed to be true, even though there is no evidence to establish its truth. The title is appropriate as it introduces the narrative form of the story, which is to impart moral values. The place where the action of the story takes place is also clearly mentioned in the title. Hence, the title stands apt for launching a mythological tale. Now, let's analyze the theme of the poem. The poem is based on the theme that greed is a grave sin. Greedy people do not deserve the blessings and the comforts of human life. Human beings should thus acquire qualities of kindness, fellow feeling, and empathy. The little woman's greed stopped her from sharing even her smallest cake with hungry Saint Peter and thus earning his wrath. Now let's see A Legend of Northland as a ballet. A ballet is a narrative poem written in short stanzas, usually quatrains, relating a simple incident in a form suitable for singing or rhythmical chanting. A ballet is a part of folklore. This poem fits well into the category of a ballet because it is composed in simple language with 4-line stanzas and has an important moral lesson to convey through an old story. It has a musical rhythm owing to its rhyme scheme pattern ABCB. In addition, the story is part of folklore passed on orally from generation to generation. Now I will read the stanzas and explain you line by line. This poem narrates the legend of an old lady who angered Saint Peter because of her greed. Away, away in the Northland, where the hours of the days are few, and the nights are so long in winter that they cannot sleep them through. Here, away, away in the Northland, the poet tells the story of a far-off place called Northland. It lies in the extreme north end of the world, somewhere around the North Pole. So here away away indicates the distance, how distant this places where the hours of the days are few. Here the winter season has very long nights but very few hours of the day, and the nights are so long in winter. The poet says, as this place in the extreme end of the world, on the extreme pole of the earth, there is very less sunlight. That's why there is only a few hours of the day that they cannot sleep them through. The nights are so long and so cold that people cannot sleep through them. That is, when they wake up from their sleep, it's still dark outside. Stanza 2. Where they harness the swift reindeer to the sledges when it snows, and the children look like bears' cubs in their funny furry clothes. Here harness means attached to strap. Attach something to an animal with the help of a strap. Swift means runs fast. Reindeer, it's a deer-like animal with big antlers. Sledges, it's a vehicle for carrying passengers and load over snow, often pulled by animals, as you can see here in the figure. These are the sledges. This is a sledge and this is a reindeer. Now, when the Northland is covered with snow, people use sledges driven by fast-running reindeers. And the children look like bears' cubs in their funny furry clothes. And the poetess is telling that it is extremely cold in Northland, so the children are made to wear heavy woolen clothes made of fur. Fur keeps their body warm. In these funny clothes, they look like the young ones of bears. Stanza 3. They tell them a curious story. I don't believe 'tis true. And yet you may learn a lesson if I tell the tale to you. They tell them a curious story. I don't believe 'tis true. Here, curious means strange, and 'tis stands for it is. It's a contraction of it is. In the Northland region prevails a curious legend, which parents tell their children. The poet is not sure whether the story of this legend is true or not, and yet you may learn a lesson if I tell the tale to you. But the poetess is telling, though I don't believe that this legend is true, but she still wants to tell the story because it contains a significant moral lesson. Stanza 4. Once when the good Saint Peter lived in the world below and walked about it, preaching just as he did, you know. So the story narrated in Northland is about the good Saint Peter, one of the 12 disciples of Jesus Christ. Lived in the world below. This legend is due of the time when Saint Peter was alive and he was on this world. He was living on this world and walked about it, preaching just as he did, you know. So Saint Peter is a disciple of Jesus, one of the disciples of Jesus, and Jesus had total 12 disciples. Preaching means delivery of religious address to a group of people, typically in church. So, and walked about it preaching just as he did, you know. He used to travel and wander to fulfill his missionary purpose of preaching the good news about Jesus. Stanza 5. He came to the door of a cottage in traveling round the earth, where a little woman was making cakes and baking them on the earth. Cottage means a small house. Earth means the floor of the fireplace. The floor of the fireplace is this area where the fire is there and the floor gets the warmth of the fire. So, Saint Peter happened to reach a cottage while traveling round the earth. In this cottage, there was a little woman, where a little woman was making cakes and baking them on the earth. So this little woman was making cakes and baking them on the fireplace. Stanza 6. And being faint with fasting, for the day was almost done, he asked her from her store of cakes to give him a single one. And being faint with fasting, for the day was almost done. Saint Peter had been wandering about the whole day on an empty stomach. He was fasting. By evening he was so weak and tired because of hunger and travel that he was on the verge of fainting. He asked her from her store of cakes to give him a single one. So he requested the little woman to give him just one cake out of the many that she had in her store. Stanza 7. So she made a very little cake, but as it baking lay, she looked at it and thought it seemed too large to give away. The little woman, when requested by the saint for a cake, made a small one for him. But when she lay it to bake, she felt that it was too big and must not be given away for free. Stanza 8. Therefore she kneaded another, and still a smaller one, but it looked, when she turned it over, as large as the first one. The small cake baked by the little woman seemed too big to her to be given away as charity, so she prepared material for a still smaller cake. But when she turned it over, it seemed to her to be as big as the earlier one. Stanza 9. Then she took a tiny scrap of dough and rolled it flat, and baked it thin as a wafer, but she couldn't part with that. The greed of the woman is further emphasized in this stanza. Here scrap means a small piece of amount of something, especially one that is left after the larger part has been used. Part with means to give up possession or control of something. In her effort to make a very small cake for St. Peter, she took very little dough and went on rolling it till it became thin like a wafer. Wafer, you understand, is a thin baked either chips or biscuits. She was so miserly that she couldn't bear even to give away that thinnest cake. Stanza 10. For she said, my cakes that seem too small when I eat of them myself are yet too large to give away. So she put them on the shelf. The little woman was so greedy that instead of giving away cake to the hungry St. Peter, she put even the smallest one on the shelf for herself. She reasoned that her cakes appeared too small when she ate, but seemed too big to be given away as charity. Stanza 11. Then good Saint Peter grew angry, for he was hungry and faint, and surely such a woman was enough to provoke a saint. Here faint means lose consciousness for a short time. Provoke means deliberately make someone annoyed or angry. Saint Peter asked the woman for only a single cake, but the woman, overpowered by greed, did not give him even a thin one. As Saint Peter was feeling weak because of hunger and fatigue, his temper was provoked by this utterly selfish behavior of the woman. The negativity of the woman was too much for the divine saint to pardon. Stanza 12. And he said, you are far too selfish to dwell in a human form, to have both food and shelter and fire to keep you warm. Here dwell means live in. When Saint Peter was angry at the greed of the little woman, he told her that She did not deserve to lead the life of a human being. Although God had provided her food and shelter and also a comfortable warm life, she had not developed the human emotions of selfless love and kindness. Stanza 13. Now you shall build as the birds do, and shall get your scanty food by boring and boring and boring all the day in the hard dry wood. Scanty means insufficient supply in quantity, and boring means digging. Angered by the behavior of the little woman, Saint Peter pronounced a curse upon her. He said that she would no longer enjoy a human life and its comforts of food, shelter, and warmth. Instead, she would become a bird. Which bird? Now here Saint Peter says, you have to get your scanty food by boring and boring and boring. Boring means digging. Which bird digs into the dry hard wood? Obviously, it's woodpecker. So he converted this lady into a woodpecker who would have to build her own nest and would have to keep digging holes in the hard and dry trunks of trees for her meager food. For the very insufficient quantity of food, she will have to keep digging in the dry woods of the tree the whole day. Stanza 14. Then up she went through the chimney, never speaking a word, and out of the top flew a woodpecker, for she was changed to a bird. After Saint Peter pronounced the curse, the little woman instantly went through the chimney, without getting a chance to say even a word. She was not given a chance even to apologize. She flew out of the top of the chimney, having been turned into a woodpecker. The saint had deprived her of her human form as she lacked the human values of kindness and charity. Stanza 15. She had a scarlet cap on her head, and that was left the same. But all the rest of her clothes were burnt black as a coal in the flame. The poetess says, when the little lady went up the chimney, she was wearing a red-colored cap on her head. This cap remained on the woodpecker's head as its plume. Now what is this plume? Plume is a long feathered or arrangement of feathers used by a bird for the display, or it is worn by the person, any person, for ornament, for show. So you can see the plume over the head of this woodpecker, which is scarlet in color. This is said that this was a cap that lady was wearing on that day, which did not burn. However, all the other clothes worn by the woman got burned as black as coal due to the flame inside the chimney. Thus the body of the bird became black. You can see the body of the bird as black, and on its head it has a scarlet plume. Stanza 16 and the last one. And every country schoolboy has seen her in the wood, where she lives in the trees till this very day, boring and boring for food. Phoebe Cary. According to the legend, the woodpecker, which every young school-going boy can see in the forest, is in fact the little woman turned bird. Till this day she lives here in the trees, and as per the curse by the Saint Peter, she has to bore the tree trunks laboriously all day to get her food. Now let's see what message the poem has in hold for us. The poem conveys the message that as human beings, we should have positive qualities like affection, love, fellow feeling, sympathy, generosity, and a sense of sharing. The poet also brings forth the idea that people with negative inhuman values like selfishness, greed, and cruelty are ultimately punished. The blessings of human life with food, shelter, and warmth have to be earned through a good moral conduct. Now let's study the literary devices used in the poem. Alliteration. Now what is alliteration? Alliteration is a repetition of vowel sounds, that is assonance, and of consonant sounds, that is consonants. The poet repeats sounds with the purpose of making a poem lyrical. Now let's take examples from the poem A Legend of the Northland. Let's study the lines. In their funny furry clothes. Here the F sound has been repeated. So that is alliteration in this line for F. If I tell the tale to you. Here the poet repeats a T sound, and being faint with fasting, the poet repeats the F sound. And still a smaller one. Here the S and L sounds have been repeated. Then she took a tiny scrap. Here again the T sound has been repeated. My cakes that seem too small. Here S sound is repeated 3 times. That is alliteration. You can try to find out more of alliteration used in the poem. Another poetic device used here is a repetition. Repetition of words and phrases is a literary device that a poet employs for the purpose of emphasis. Examples: away, away in the Northland. In the opening lines of the poem, away, away in the Northland, the repetition of away emphasizes how distant Northland is, and rolled it flat. Here, similarly, in the line, and rolled it flat, the repetition of rolled emphasizes that the lady rolled the dough many times to make it as flat and thin as a wafer. Next one is by boring and boring and boring. The repetition of the word boring emphasizes the hard effort that the woman turned woodpecker has to make to find its food. Next device used here is enjambment. Enjambment is a literary device, refers to the practice of running lines from one to the next without using any kind of punctuation marks to indicate pause. For example, full stop without the use of full stop, comma, etc. Let's see the examples. And the nights are so long in winter that they cannot sleep them through. Here you can notice that the first line rolls on to the next without any punctuation mark. Next example, and the children look like bear cubs in their funny furry clothes. There is no comma or full stop after the first line, if you can notice, and it rolls on to the second one. There is one more enjambment used here is at one more place. For she said, my cakes that seem too small when I eat of them myself, and yet too large to give away. The first line carries on to the next without any punctuation mark. Even the second line carries on to the third line without any punctuation mark. The fourth literary device used here is simile. In a simile, a comparison between two distinctly different things is indicated by the word like or as. Using the words like and as, the comparison is done between two distinctly different things. For example, thin as a wafer. The thinness of the cake has been compared with the thinness of a wafer. Thus, a cake was too thin to qualify as a proper cake. The comparison also highlights the little woman's greed and stinginess. Next simile used here is as black as coal. The body of the woodpecker became as dark and black as coal because it had to pass through the burning chimney. Now let's check the rhyme scheme used in the poem. Now what is rhyme scheme? The ordered pattern of rhymes at the ends of the lines of a poem or verse. So here I have highlighted the last words of each line of the stanza. Northland, few, winter, true. So the poem is in the form of a ballet with 4-line stanzas. Each stanza follows the pattern of the rhyme scheme A, B, C, B. Now let's check. The last word of the first line is Northland. Next line is few. The sound of Northland doesn't rhyme with few, so we have labeled it as A. We always start the rhyme scheme with alphabet A. So Northland is given the name or the rhyme scheme as labeled as A. Few. The sound of few doesn't rhyme with Northland. So their sound is different, so I am giving a different rhyme pattern to few, that is B. Next comes winter. Winter doesn't rhyme either with Northland or few. So I have labeled it as rhyme scheme C. Next, fourth one is through. The sound of through rhymes with few. That's why I have again labeled through with B. So the pattern in this first stanza followed is A, B, C, B. You can try out other paragraphs, other stanzas for the rhyme scheme yourself for practice. I hope you have very well understood the poem, the literary device used here, the message that is conveyed through this poem and the rhyme scheme. Thank you.